Talking to her, he realized how easy it was to present an appearance of orthodoxy while having no grasp whatever of what orthodoxy meant. In a way, the worldview of the party imposed itself most successfully on people incapable of understanding it. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. But by lack of understanding, they remained sane. They simply swallowed everything. And what they swallowed did them no harm because it left no residue behind, just as a grain of corn will pass undigested through the body of a bird. As many of you may have guessed, that came from George Orwell's novel, 1984. Doublespeak, Big Brother, the surveillance state, thought police, all of these are still current memes and themes made popular by this book. In fact, it's hard to think of another novel that has had quite the impact that this one has had. And I'm reminded of the book today not only because of the time we live in, the time of Facebook, Twitter, I refuse to call it X, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and whatever it is that my kids are using these days. The time of George Santos, Clarence Thomas, Bob Menendez, and yes, the Donald Trump. But today, what's ringing a bell for me is the war in Israel and Palestine. The ethics and atrocities of that ongoing conflict, I'm not going to be able to do justice this morning. I'm just going to offer that right now there are important and deep comparisons and contrasts being drawn between this conflict and other conflicts and struggles of oppressed people and the practice of terrorism in the world. And I am keenly aware of how complicated all of that is. And so are the Russians. A recent New York Times report tells us that Russia, China, and Iran all support the terrorist group Hamas. This is not good news, but by itself, it's really hardly surprising. Not that anyone ought to mistake me for a foreign policy expert, but it doesn't take an expert to see that the United States and Russia have been involved in proxy wars for many, many years now. I'm Gen X. This is what I grew up with. But I have also been recently reminded that Russia and China have both invested very heavily in disinformation campaigns against you, the average American voter. As we now know, these two countries had an outsized impact on our 2016 and 2020 elections, and the New York Times and other outlets have reported that since then, those activities have only increased. What kinds of activities? Weird ones. For example, as of 2021, 19 of the top 20 Christian evangelical Facebook pages were operated by farms of hackers located in, you guessed it, Russia and China. Christian evangelicals, one is tempted to note, have the very obvious and notable characteristic of voting a particular way. Experts now believe that Russian and Chinese propaganda is today one of the reasons why that is so. And as the war escalates in Israel and Palestine, divisive and blatantly false information on and off social media has only escalated. Our own much beloved representatives in various houses of Congress are currently and blithely repeating fiction as fact. But I guess they're probably used to that by now. Bless their hearts. As an aside, let me recommend once again the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. This film gives an eye-opening and hopefully useful account of how social media works and how it is used to motivate you, anger you, and manipulate you. I like to call it a good start, but I know that there will be more required of you. Why? Well, it feels cynical to say it, but the results seem rather clear. Lying out loud and online, it works. It works well enough that we'll surely be seeing a lot more of it in the years ahead. And there's bad news, too. All of those nifty new tools we mistakenly call artificial intelligence will only make it easier to hide, obscure, and mislead. Currently available AI tools make it really easy to pass off outrageous lies, exaggerations, and distortions. The point, I suspect, it is only a matter of time before someone manages to start another war. This worries me, and to be blunt, it annoys me vastly because we have serious problems to worry about. In addition to war, we cannot afford to lose track of global climate change, water shortages, food insecurity, income inequality, disease, farms of hackers squirreled away in a warehouse outside of Shanghai and St. Petersburg, generating misinformation by the terabyte, ought to be low on the list of things we worry about. And yet, 70-some years after 1984, here we are. At some point, we'll get back to AI. It's weird, it's interesting, it's problematic, and it will create some real changes and opportunities, both ethically and practically. It's also not AI, but let's leave that for a future Sunday. Instead, I want to segue into doubt. That sounds like a bit of a hard term, but I do think it's related. Doubt, skepticism, even outright suspicion, they can be quite healthy. And when considering what we're being served through our various media or political outlets, I think they are intrinsic and probably life-saving. And they're something we need to get a lot better at. Why? Well, let's start with what we know. Human beings crave certainty. Certainty is comforting. Maybe that's why we naturally gravitate to people who are certain, people who have solutions, people who tell us our most pernicious problems are solvable by quick and straightforward actions, as if our problems were werewolves in need of a silver bullet. All we need is a decisive stroke. All we need is this one thing. All we need is one pill and we will be all better. One size fits all. That's the American way. And anyone offering such solutions, such clarity, such certainty, well, these people will be prophets, leaders, and wealthy. To be clear, I'm not saying you should not be prophets, leaders, or wealthy. I'm just saying we ought to be suspicious of any statement that starts with all we need. My friends, here at least you are allowed to doubt, to have questions, to ask questions. And I want to suggest that questions are the very first and maybe even short step to science. Every Sunday morning, you will remember that I open our service with the words, balanced with the insights of modern science. I put a lot of emphasis on this intentionally. I'm invoking our humanist tradition that insists on reason and truth. I am also invoking our beloved fourth principle, the one that calls us to free and responsible search for truth and meaning, a principle that hints at our very long Unitarian and Universalist habit of being annoying, of asking deeply uncomfortable questions of authority and tradition. I am invoking a tradition that recalls that we were the ones that lifted up scholarship, that called into question basic truths like the Trinity, biblical inerrancy, and hell. It was our ancestors that dared to ask tough questions. They tested easy answers, and we have made it our purpose today. We wrote it into our UUA bylaws. We will continue that legacy, refusing to stop questioning our answers, because we know that while time moves on, so does knowledge. We are seekers after truth and goodness, after all. I'm going to pause here just a second. Saying all of that is one thing, but how do we seek truth and goodness? That's a fair question, and for those of you that are keeping score, that's a philosophy question. Quick aside, many of you remember that I was a grad student in philosophy. I loved it, But I can honestly say that in the last 30 years, no one has ever asked me to talk more about philosophy. Until last week, when someone in the new member class requested it. Take that, Dad. And that brings me to a certain philosophy professor, one Jeff Pinn. You may have heard of him. Out there in the Wild West, that is the YouTube, you can find wireless philosophy. It's at wireless philosophy, Wi-Fi for short. Probably much to Jeff's embarrassment, I posted the link to that on our Facebook page. This is Jeff's video series, his Fundamentals to Critical Thinking video, one of the very first in that series, is a brilliant jumping off point. And the importance of these skills that he teaches, I cannot emphasize strongly enough, especially given the 1984 nature of politics today. Honestly, I'm considering bribing my teens to get them to watch. I'm thinking cash. Seriously, we should probably make this part of the RE curriculum. I'm sure Jeff would be thrilled. Anyway, here's the short form. I can't do justice more than that, but let's try it. Critical thinking begins with having good reasons for the things that we believe. And by good, I mean at least probably true. And when we're presented with an argument for or against something, like should Congress pay back what it liberated from the Social Security Fund to pay for tax cuts to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, or should we provide support for Israel and Palestine, we need to understand whether or not the argument that we're being given is good or bad. What we do not want is to believe or do bad or wrong things. When given a choice, we need to figure out what might be a good option, or perhaps which of them is least bad. And when we do not get it right, or not get it right the first time, it's our critical thinking skills that we use to correct, adapt, and hopefully make better future decisions. Critical thinking is, I submit, the foundation of science, and the discipline of doubt. Now, Carl Sagan teaches us this, quote, "Science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we are up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes rambling along." In his 1995 book, The Demon-Haunted World, Sagan offers up a tour de force apologetic for reason, truth, and science. Not the I'm sorry sort of apologetic, but the apologetic in the sense of presenting a defense of a theory or doctrine. And Sagan's doctrine? Doubt. The project of this book is to ask good questions of bad science. So things like crop circles, ESP, faith healing, witchcraft, UFOs, all of that gets extended discussions. And to each, Sagan brings skepticism and doubt. Starting there, Sagan discusses the facts as we know them, and also discusses the fraudsters, the grifters, the entertainers, and the myth makers, all in an attempt to banish at least some of the noise crowding out the valid and important things that we actually do know, things that serve and advance our individual and collective search for truth and meaning and not obscure it. To be fair, his conclusions are disappointing, especially to those of us who want to believe. As Sagan says, quote, "It is disheartening to discover government corruption and incompetence, for example. But is it better not to know about it? What interest does ignorance serve? If we humans bear, say, hereditary propensities toward the hatred of strangers, isn't self-knowledge the only antidote? If we long to believe that the stars rise and set for us, that we are the reason there is a universe, does science do us a disservice in deflating our conceits? Maybe it does. But maybe instead it does exactly the opposite. If science can help us see past charlatans and pseudoscience, perhaps it can also help us see past the lies and deceits of modern politics. Help us banish demons like these. Trickle-down economics works. Healthcare and education are less important than tax cuts. Elections are rigged. Gun control doesn't work. Today, these lies get stated as self-evident truths. They go unquestioned by a great number of our family, friends, and neighbors. And if this makes your critical thinking muscles groan, good. Because each of these so-called debates is a vampire. Each consumes the air, clouds the mind, and drains the public of the will to dream. They rob us of the time and energy to do other things, powerful things, amazing things, achievable things. Things like ending hunger, ending disease, ending climate change. Instead, we have to debate whether coal is dirty and clean water is good. Look, I know I'm going late, so let me wrap this up. This week, our friends, families, and neighbors in Kentucky, Mississippi, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio are heading to the polls. Theirs is the job of sorting signal from noise, and we must wish them well. 1 year from now, though, it'll be you heading to the polls. And between now and then, you can expect a tidal wave of nonsense and subterfuge, rhetorical sleight of hand, and AI-enhanced lies, all landing on your virtual and literal doorstep. A lot will hinge on how you respond. We will be facing armies of liars and mountains of cash. And against that, we are going to proclaim our values, reclaim our rights, and push for the advances we know are necessary and important, for causes we believe to be good and right and just. And I will ask you to join these efforts as best as you're able. All I can promise is that it's going to be a ride. But it isn't all cynicism and despair. I'm the wrong guy for that. To paraphrase Geralt of Rivia, I'm Gen X. I've lived through a whole dark age and 3 supposed end of days. It's nonsense. I'm just not your sky is falling kind of guy, not by a long shot. I believe we will yet get to do amazing things, wonderful things, things that we can be proud of. I believe that because we can see at least a part of the arc of history in front of us. I believe our tools give us this power, and I believe that if we seek the truth, if we hold each other and to our ideals of community connection and care, if we are bold, then together we will bend that arc toward a future worthy of us and our aspirations. Doubt, skepticism, critical thinking, and science, our correctives, our greatest tools, our greatest hope. What Sagan calls our, quote, candles in the dark. And my friends, that is your task. Not this year, but every year going forward. Our choice collectively is to celebrate the wonders of modern science. We can make heroes of the explorers, make the search for truth and knowledge our individual and collective passion. Yes, we must teach science and critical thinking skills, but we must also teach ourselves and our kids to wonder, to look up, to dream, to see the spill of stars above, and be thrilled and inspired by the promise of untold wonders out there waiting to be known. And with that, I'll turn, as I often do, for a final hopeful word from Carl Sagan. Once, we were hunters and foragers. The frontier was everywhere. We were bounded only by the earth and the ocean and the sky. The open road still softly calls. For all our failings, Despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders undreamt of in our time will we have wrought in another generation and another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century and the next millennium? Our remote descendants, safely arrayed on many worlds through the solar system and beyond, will be unified by their common heritage, by their regard for their home planet, and by the knowledge that whatever other life may be, the only humans in all the universe came from Earth. They will gaze up and strain to find the blue dot in their skies. They will marvel at how vulnerable the repository of all our potential once was, how perilous our infancy, how humble our beginnings, how many rivers we had to cross before we found our way. We have the candles. May their light help us find our way. Amen.
Visit us at UUSG.org.